joining us today for another lunch and learn. We'll be going over and breaking down the governor's budget proposal that came out on February 6th. We're going to go over some house rules, and then we're going to get right into the presentation. Thank you for being here. If you want to go ahead and identify yourself in the chat, just say where you're from in the chat, the organization that you're representing. Also, this program is being recorded and will be posted to our webpage and YouTube if you want to share it out or watch it later. Also, you can find supporting resources and program notes after this recording on our website. And also, we just released our budget basics this morning. You can find that on our website as well and on our social media pages. If you have a question, write it in the chat box. We'll get to it in the end after the presentation and ask a few questions. All right, Lindsay.
Actually, I'll kick us off, Stephen, and then we'll
Okay.
go into Lindsay. So thanks, everybody. Welcome. As Stephen said, it looks like we got a big crowd here today, so that's not surprising. I know there's a lot of interest always every year in, the state budget process, which starts with the governor's budget proposal. And so what we're going to do today is we've got a special guest, Adam Zemke, a good friend, colleague, and tremendous advocacy partner of ours at Michigan's Children to join me. Adam and I will talk through a little bit kind of the broad overview, some differences that we're going to see this year and how this is likely to play out. Then we'll jump in and let Lindsay Huddleston and Maddie Elliott from our team here at Michigan's Children outline some of the key areas of Michigan's Children's priorities as they're related to the governor's budget proposal. And then the four of us will have a brief conversation about that, but then really open it up to any questions that folks have, either about specifics that are either included or not included in the governor's budget proposal and or process questions as well. So start thinking of those. You can pop them in the chat, or we might have an opportunity, pop them in the chat, I guess, as you think of them, and we'll go through as many as we can as we get towards the tail end here. So why don't we start? Adam, you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Matt, and the Michigan's Children team for having me today. Adam Zemke. I've been around the education policy world for it's getting up there now. Not quite as long as Matt, but about a decade, and served in the House. Worked heavily on education policy, K-12 policy at the time. Since then, have expanded that to a lot of out of school time and early childhood aspects, and currently do that through our firm 1837 Partners that I have with a couple of colleagues.
Great. Well, thanks, Adam, for joining us. So let's kind of lay down kind of the backdrop here for everybody. Obviously, the process is moving along in somewhat of a typical fashion at this point, but there are some changes, obviously, from the last couple of years. And one of particular note is based on the election last November. The Republicans took control of the state house. So we're back to divided government, which is something that we've seen in various forms throughout the years here in Michigan. So that's not entirely new, but that obviously adds a different element to the budget process. When you don't have all three legs of the stool from one particular party, it certainly creates a different dynamic, right, as the budget's being negotiated. But like I said, that's not something that's unheard of or uncommon here in Michigan. I think even more so, kind of the backdrop for this year's budget is really being driven by what's happening at the federal level or what might happen at the federal level, right? There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty about what may end up happening from a funding standpoint, from budgetary standpoint at the federal level. And our state budget in Michigan, just like every other state in the country, is really significantly dependent upon federal funds in all areas of the budget. And so that uncertainty at the federal level is certainly going to be a big factor as this process moves along. But talk about those things a little bit, or what else you're kind of thinking from a big picture background standpoint that are going to be obvious influences in this year's budget process.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so as Matt indicated, the governor did put out the exec rec. We're expecting, and from indications that we've received, this is going to be a little bit of a slower budget process than we've seen in years past. I think many folks on this call likely have become accustomed to wrapping up the budget at the end of June, and potentially seeing a supplemental budget bill passed later in the year, in that current fiscal year or shortly thereafter. We are being told that this is going to take a little bit longer, that there's a longer expectation, and not to worry about that. That's just the process they're employing. So that's one key difference that I would say, that it differs quite a bit from real time. There is not a ton of money left on the books after the exec rec. If you were to pass that in its current form, that uses up a lot of money. It is a large budget. We're seeing, I think Matt can attest, when he was in the House and when I was in the House, our budgets were in the $50 billion range total for the state budget. We're at over $80 billion now, and about a $6 billion increase in the school aid fund from when I was in the House to today. And so we're talking, large budgets. We are talking as well, there was surplus funds left over from current fiscal year and upcoming fiscal year years based on the projections from Treasury and the House fiscal agencies. That's another key development. I know that the governor has taken those monies into account, but as we also know, the legislature may have different ideas about what they want to do with that funding. But the bottom line is that it's not a bad place to be, with one notable exception, and that is the uncertainty at the federal level that Matt indicated. I think that's making everybody justifiably nervous. We are starting to see some of the policy implications of the Trump administration and the Republican Congress with the House passage last night of their CR. We're going to start to see where those funding cuts that are at the discretion of Congress actually lie. I think up to this point, everyone that I've talked to, especially in the nonprofit world, has been nervous because of some of the executive orders, but we've also seen that a lot of those executive orders are not possible because of congressionally discretionary funding. And so it really comes down to whether or not Congress is going to agree to the types of cuts that the EOs have described. So I think that's another key point of uncertainty. But I do, rest somewhat assured that Congress doesn't have a history of quote unquote burning the place down. And so I'm less nervous there. But, bottom line is, if a significant amount of federal funding is contracted, that's going to impact the state budget, and it's going to eviscerate those surpluses that we really could use, frankly. So those would be a few key takeaways that I have.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Yeah, as Adam indicated, the key point of this, so there's a January revenue estimating conference done at the state level every year. That's the number the governor uses then to present her budget, or to prepare her budget proposal for the legislature. Revenues were up. I mean, Michigan's in a fairly good place financially as a state revenues, but obviously this uncertainty at the federal level is a big concern. So, and the other thing that's important to note is the governor assumed, as I think she made sense and does still make sense, assumed essentially flat funding from the feds in her budget proposal. With all this uncertainty, there's no other way to really do it. So she essentially assumed that we would get the same amount of money from the feds for all of these things that we're getting currently, and then built her budget based upon that. And so, and then I think indicative of a lot of this uneasiness around what might happen. We don't. The governor's budget from Michigan's children's perspective overall is a little bit ho-hum. Not a lot of big, new, flashy spending ideas or programs. Some modest investments in some of the areas, or increased investments in some of the areas where we care about. We'll get into those in a minute with Maddie and Lindsay. But overall, we're still, I think, in general, a little bit frustrated by the lack of prioritization or focus on kids and families. And still a lot of focus on other areas, which, is the reality of where we've been with this administration, frankly, and not surprising, but just means we've got more work to do as child advocates moving forward. The one other thing that's, I think, a little bit of note to me, and this little bit of insider baseball, but this is typical too. Adam said we're off to a slower start. Well, we're expecting a slower process, and I think we're off to a slower start even than what we typically see which is normal when you see a change in leadership in one of the legislative chambers, like we saw in the House. But also the committee structure that they've adopted is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, and they at least appear at this point to be dividing up some of these departmental budgets into different subcommittees, which is just a unique something we haven't seen in recent past, at least. So, for instance, they have a behavioral health and sciences, I think, is the name of a subcommittee on the House side, appropriation subcommittee. So, I mean, you'd expect them to try to take the behavioral health aspects out of the DHHS budget and put them in front of that subcommittee. That's just a different approach than what we've seen recently and how that plays out. It sounds like similarly with MyLeap, there's a plan to do something similar to divide up different components of the MyLeap budget between different subcommittees. And so how that meshes and plays out is going to be, for those of us on the inside dealing with this on a daily basis, is something that we're all trying to figure out as well. Anything else I'm missing before we turn it over to Lindsay and Maddie? Adam?
Yeah, just one thing, since you sparked a additional note as you're talking about the insider track. You know, as you indicated, there are these different subcommittee budgets on the policy front, though, too. You know, we are seeing some oversight committees be created, especially in the health and human service areas. It wouldn't shock me if there's going to be some oversight around education, too. You know, especially, I think everybody was pretty laser focused on the NAEP scores that came out just a few weeks ago in the K-12 sphere. And I think that especially in the early childhood space, the impact of how you know, early childhood is having on K-12, I think could come up. I think there's going to be increased scrutiny around K-12 too. I know you've got. I was looking at some of the names that popped up, and I know there's certainly some on here that I know that operate in both spaces. So I would say there is going to be a fairly healthy, is what I would describe, oversight process. Healthy doesn't mean good or bad. Just going to be meaty, and so you know, I think we can expect that too.
Sure. And the other obvious thing is, as it relates to the budget process, we're going to see a very different budget come out of the House than what we saw from the governor's proposal and then what we're likely to see from the Senate. You know, I mean, we would expect naturally that the Senate version will be more similar to what the governor has proposed, with obviously certainly some differences, but we're likely to see a very different approach taken by the House Republicans and the Republican caucus in the House to this. And you know, that just means that then when we get to that stage and we have a House budget out and a Senate budget out, reconciling those differences is going to take more time. There's going to be significant more differences. And I think you couple that with, you know, probably still some uncertainty at the federal level, and everything's pointing towards a long summer and even early fall for those of us in and around Lansing, I think.
Yes.
All right. Well, why don't we jump in right now to Lindsay? We'll have Lindsay and Maddie go through some of the highlights. And as Stephen indicated at the beginning, our budget basics is hot off the presses. So it includes all these things that we'll talk about and highlight here, but also some other things as well. So look for that on our website. Maybe we can even share a link to it in the chat, and we can send that out to everybody who's registered here as well as we get off this call. But Lindsay, why don't you jump right in?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Adam, for joining us. And hello to the 70-plus individuals who are online for the call. Lindsay Huddleston, Policy Associate with Michigan's Children. Part of my portfolio includes kinship, foster care, and things along those lines. So as it relates to Governor Whitmer's budget recommendations, three things that stood out that I'll emphasize was her focus on child welfare enhancements. As you all may know, there was $24.4 million in the budget dedicated to this, with 22.6 coming from the general fund. And the aim, again, is to enhance placement of children in the child welfare system with relatives, improving overall stability and well-being. Now, what I have to say is what that is actually a definition of kinship care as we know it. I know many of the stakeholders are on the line right now can relate to that, can understand, and in some cases may be connected to the kinship care community along as well. Michigan's Children, we play a role with the Michigan Kinship Care Coalition, a great group of individuals who bring their learned experience to the table. So I think it's important to emphasize that many of these recommendations that the governor is making actually promote kinship, and we want to talk a little bit more about that. So to give some historical context of where the story behind the picture, as many of you may know, especially in the Metro Detroit area, the Wayne County Juvenile Detention Facility is being demolished based on some unfortunate allegations that have been made and taken place there. But I want to take you back in time to circa 1999 from a personal standpoint. Matt, this was before you and Adam made the trip up to Lansing to run But at the time, I was a GED instructor at then Wayne County Juvenile Detention Facility. That wasn't this building, but the actual building connected to the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. I'm sure in your time in Detroit, Matt, you kind of ran around that area. You knew what that was like. So we transitioned that group of young people over to this facility that you see. And ironically, the reason they were moving to this new multi-million-dollar facility, this $50 million facility, was because of overcrowding and because of other challenges. So here we are close to a quarter century later, and that doesn't date anybody on this call. Here we are talking about the grand opening and the grand closing. So I give that context to let you know that this isn't, the kind of the arc of this situation and where we are. So Stephen, if you don't mind, if you can go ahead and change and go to the next slide. And thank you for putting this together as well, Stephen. So what are we talking about? The three emphases the governor has talked about in these recommendations has been operations, capacity, and support. From an operations standpoint, the focus is talking about strengthening kinship placements, which I'm talking about, the licensing aspect, and the financial assistance programs that enhance the accessibility of informal caregivers. So many are actual informal caregivers and don't know. And the unfortunate situation is that you may have a situation where grandparents who have made the life transition as it relates to retiring, consolidating their lifestyle, as well as just kind of, putting themselves in a position to kind of enjoy their latter years, they're faced with this huge personal family challenge of becoming informal caregivers. They have to watch their grandchildren now. There may have been a mental health crisis, a substance abuse crisis with the children, and now these grandparents who were empty nesters are now taking on this financial burden going forward. So this is important, and we can appreciate the governor recognizing that, but we'll talk a little bit more about what else we think we should be done. The capacity aspect, talking about increasing recruitment efforts for foster parents and provide community-based service to support these at-risk families. Unfortunately, the foster care population, as far as foster care parents, that's an underdeveloped group of individuals, and we have to continue to talk about the need to be able to replenish individuals who can come in and step up as it relates to foster parents. And it's important that the governor is putting resource towards that, but there's some other issues that come with that we'll talk about in a moment. And the last of those three enhancements is the support. Talking about allocating funds for kinship caregivers to receive a comparable assistance to the traditional foster parents, reducing financial strain. This is when my learned experience from being close to people who work on this every day come into mind. So many informal caregivers and kinship caregivers are literally ashamed that they have become in a financial strain based on taking on this new responsibility. Not only ashamed that their finances are being challenged with this because of something that many of them feel obligated to do, but also ashamed to reach out to ask for support or to even believe that they can get support. Well, I'm taking care of my grandchild. Why would anyone help me? But to know that there are resources available. So I think it's important that we understand there's a big need for a support system that grows. And that actual dollar amount, we talked about that overall $24.4 million investment. That's going to prioritize the family-based care and reduce the reliance on these institutional settings. And that refers back to the first slide, unfortunately. But the reality is that there has to be more alternatives to juvenile care. There has to be more alternatives to juvenile care, and kinship is one of those. Specifically, the $13.3 million enhancement is focused on strengthening support for foster care recruitment and community reintegration and family-based placement. So we also have to understand what comes next after the individual's placed in the kinship setting. We have to work on integrating them back into the community as it relates to what they were used to. Now, that's another challenge that comes as well, and we'll talk about that before I wrap up this portion of the presentation. And lastly, the $3.5 million investment that the governor is recommending to expand the treatment of foster care services, increase family incentive grants, and improve the in-home support services. The issue with foster care and kinship doesn't stop once the young person is placed. There has to be continuing and ongoing support to help these individuals going forward. And I do appreciate, appreciate the governor recognizing that, but there's some challenges that come with that. So as I get ready to wrap up this portion, and you get ready to hear the rest of our great team, Stephen, if you can go to the next slide, let's talk about what the real pros and cons are of what the governor shared. We can say one of the pros is that kinship care improves the overall child behavioral mental health outcomes. There's a lot of studies that support that from the American Bar Association on. Also increasing the permanency rates and providing that emotional stability to keep them with their families. We all know how important it is to have family support, and those who are closer to this issue know how important it is to be able to connect and keep these individuals connected. However, we talk about this financial strain and the limited support and extended time in the system actually impacts that quality of care, because the longer the person has to stay with an informal caregiver or their kinship caregiver, that becomes more of a financial strain on the actual caregiver. And actually, and it's unfortunate to say, but true, sometimes that actually impacts the care service. I've been on a call where someone was a kinship caregiver and they were contributing to the kinship care cause by supporting us, but said they actually felt bad because of an incident they had because they were so overwhelmed. And I can say it, you don't have to say it as an adult. We can be overwhelmed with many of these challenges to where they had to take a step away to gather themselves because they felt that the services that they were providing this individual were being challenged because of how overwhelmed they were by the things that are happening in life. And I think that's something to understand. So while we commend the governor for putting these resources towards resources that can help with these alternatives as it relates to foster care and juvenile care, there has to be more resources to help sustain the capacity here. And we cannot overlook that fact. We cannot, quote unquote, drop this amount of dollars on the doorstep and expect it to be done. And lastly, what are some of the missed opportunities? While kinship care offers a comfort of extended family and all those things that we have to continue to talk about, what is the financial outlook going to be? Is this a sustainable plan? Are these one-time efforts enough? And when we're ready to revisit that, are we ready to put the type of resources behind the kinship and the foster care programs to be able to make sure our young people can be impacted? So that's all that I have. Thank you, Matt, for allowing me the chance to kick this off and share from a personal standpoint. And I look forward to following the rest of the presentation today.
Thanks, Lindsay. We'll jump into Maddie with some of the highlights around early childhood, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, thank you. So let's dive into the childcare components of the budget. So the governor proposed some important advancements for the childcare field, but really we were hoping to see more robust investment in childcare, considering the childcare deserts that we see across the state, the unaffordable rates that families are paying for care, the poverty wages that are just the norm in the childcare field. So, you know, we have a lot of work on our hands to push for greater investments, but the governor did propose two really exciting things I wanted to highlight. One was $50 million for the Child Development and Care Program to implement childcare contracts and prospective payments. So the Child Development and Care Program is the child care scholarship program for low-income families. And this step to implement childcare contracts would increase the financial stability of childcare businesses and increase availability of childcare access for infants and toddlers, children with disabilities, and families in areas where childcare is scarce. So it would be the state contracting with childcare businesses for a certain number of slots for the childcare scholarship. And that would be a really great step in the right direction for Michigan. We've done a pilot program that was very, very successful with infant and toddler childcare programs where they were able to increase their wages for childcare teachers with the additional funds. And so we know contracts is the direction that we should head as a childcare scholarship program. And we're glad that the governor is prioritizing that. We don't have details on like how many contracts would be provided or like how this would work across the state, but we'll let you know when we have more details on that. And then the other part of the $50 million would go toward prospective payments for the field. So this would be paying childcare programs before they provide services to families. Right now, the model for the childcare scholarship is that the state pays childcare providers within 2 weeks after services are provided or care. And so this prospective payment improvement is in line with what the federal government offered as guidance to childcare programs across the state. And so it's a really great way to promote the financial stability as well of childcare programs. It's not feasible for a lot of businesses to be, you know, thousands of dollars in the red every 2 weeks before they get repaid by the state. So we're really grateful that the governor is headed in that direction. And then the next priority I wanted to highlight for childcare was flat funding for the infant and early childhood mental health consultation service. This is a program that supports childcare and preschool programs across the state with managing and just growing the social, emotional, and behavioral development of young children by connecting mental health professionals with childcare programs or childcare teachers so that they can develop more skills with handling challenging behaviors in the classroom. So the governor prioritized just flat funding for the program, which would enable the 31 counties currently serving childcare programs across the state with that service. We would like to see the mental health consultation program expanded to all 83 counties in the state. So we'll be pushing for increased investment in that program. And then I wanted to note for missed opportunities, the governor did not propose increasing rates for the child care scholarship. And this is at a time when we have a true cost of care report from the Think Babies Michigan Coalition that shows that we have to invest over $3 billion in the child care system to properly fund the system in terms of having livable wages for the child care professionals, reducing costs for parents, providing high quality care. So we have a long ways to go to meet that gap between what the state currently pays in childcare scholarship rates and what the true cost of caring for a child in childcare really entails. And so we have a long ways to go with that. We're pushing for increased rates for the childcare scholarship. We also noticed there were no investments or proposals for system improvements for the childcare scholarship. Right now, families are only notified about the need to reapply for their scholarship through the mail. They're required to reapply annually. And those, letters get lost in the mail and families, forget to reapply. And then the family falls off of the provider's caseload. And that puts providers in the hole where they, aren't getting compensated for the up to 2 weeks of care that they provided without knowing the family had fallen off the rolls of the child care scholarship. So there are the proposal that we are recommending is that the department also send out text, email, and phone call reminders so that families can maintain their coverage under the child care scholarship. And we also are pushing hard at Michigan's Children to increase the wages of childcare teachers across the state. We did not see the governor prioritize workforce wages, which was a real missed opportunity considering that she proposed a early childhood educator tax credit back in 2023, which would have increased wages for the childcare field between $1,000 and $3,000. So we see that opportunity to work in a bipartisan fashion with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature to pursue a tax credit so that childcare providers can have some relief and have some assistance with just making ends meet and staying in a profession where the turnover rate is 65%. So we have some work to do in childcare. Next slide. For GSRP, the governor continued her several year-long pursuit of universal pre-K. Currently, about 38% of 4-year-olds in Michigan receive GSRP preschool programming in the state. So that's a great step in the right direction. You know, we're glad that more families are able to access free, high quality preschool. But we also see that this can have a negative impact on the childcare field if we're not equally investing in infant and toddler care, because taking 4-year-olds out of childcare programs can make the business model for childcare a little bit tenuous. So the governor proposed a 3.8% increase in the per child allocation for GSRP, bringing the total up to $10,577 for full day students. She also proposed including childcare group homes in GSRP. Currently, in our mixed delivery system for GSRP, school districts provide GSRP along with childcare centers and other community-based organizations. And so right now, home providers are not able to provide GSRP. So we're really glad that the governor is prioritizing allowing group homes to offer GSRP. There are tons of high quality group homes across the state that could benefit from serving their community with free high quality preschool, and it would shore up the financial stability of those group homes who sometimes are losing 4-year-olds to GSRP classrooms in school districts. And then the governor also proposed removing the income cap for GSRP, as she has in the past. Right now, the income cap for GSRP is at 400% of the federal poverty level. So she proposed removing the income cap. She also proposed increasing funding for Strong Beginnings, which is our state's 3-year-old preschool program that's comparable to GSRP. So with this expansion, they hope to serve 4,000 children by the 2028 school year, and also try out more versions of this program, including inclusive classrooms for children with disabilities, and a few other priorities. So within GSRP, the missed opportunity that we see is child care family homes were still not included in the governor's proposal. Group homes for child care serve between 6 and 12 children. So those were included in the governor's proposal, but family homes serve between 1 and 6 children and were not included to be able to provide GSRP. And there are lots of high quality family homes that currently provide 3- and 4-year-old high quality preschool that we think could be a good fit for offering GSRP. Next slide. Thank you. And then other priorities I wanted to highlight for early childhood. The governor proposed flat funding for after school or out of school time programs at $50 million. So, you know, we're glad that allocation is being maintained by her. We also saw that she proposed a $4.7 million increase in funding for Early On, which is Michigan's early intervention system for babies and toddlers who have disabilities, developmental delays, and medical conditions. So Early On really needs a statewide investment of $230 million to fully fund the program, according to a cost study from commissioned by MDE from AIR. So right now at the state level, we invest in Early On at $23.7 million. So she proposed a $4 million increase. We see that there's quite a bigger need than what she proposed. And so the Early On Coalition is coming together to propose doubling funding for Early On to get closer to meeting the need for families who right now are not always getting like the frequency or the types of early intervention services that they need, depending on the county they live in and whether there's like a special education millage in that county or additional funding for early intervention. We also finally noticed that the governor proposed $400,000 for DHHS to prepare a feasibility study to determine long-term cost, benefits, and potential barriers associated with implementing continuous eligibility for Medicaid for kids ages 0 to 5. So this would be like a child would be continuously eligible for Medicaid between the ages of 0 through 5 if they're deemed eligible. And so this would be a huge benefit for families and for young children to make sure that the Medicaid coverage doesn't lapse from year to year. So I'll turn it back to Matt, I think, for our next part of the conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Maddie and Lindsay. There's obviously for those highlights on some of the areas of the governor's budget. Obviously, there's a ton more. As Adam indicated, it's over $80 billion in public funding in the governor's proposal. You can learn about. There's a lot more priorities of ours and others highlighted in the budget basics that I referenced that you can find on our website and that we'll share out with folks after this as well. A couple other things I'll note, and then I'll turn it over to see if Adam has any other things he wants to note, and then we'll open up for questions. I do see a couple of questions popping up in the chat. Please drop them in there if you have any other questions. On the school aid side, obviously a lot of interest on the school aid fund hours. We didn't highlight that in this because we have a limited time. The big news on school aid was 4.1% was the increase in the foundation allowance that the governor is proposing. Similarly, for those of us that are really focused on equity, she did include the opportunity index, which is the tool that we've been using to try to push for more equitable school funding, but unfortunately only at a 4.1% increase to the opportunity index as well, which functionally doesn't really serve its purpose, right? The idea of the opportunity index is that we invest more using that formula to help offset the or to help address the equity issues that we feel we have in school funding. So, recognizing it is great, but not overly funding it is a problem. She continued the free school breakfast and lunch program at a cost of about $200 million. This has been wildly successful, something that Michigan's Children and a number of other advocacy partners advocated hard for a couple of years ago. This, just to note, though, is really a perfect example of a program that would be in dire jeopardy if we see significant changes at the federal level. We're only able to do this, provide free school breakfast and lunch for all students in the state of Michigan because of the at-risk dollars that we get from the federal government, right? And so, that pays a big portion of that. And then we use state money to make it universal and free for everybody. But you take that federal money away from that and it just doesn't work. The dollars won't work at the state level. So that's an example of what we're talking about with this uncertainty at the federal level. The other thing of note, Maddie highlighted the GSRP. One thing that is certain to come up in the conversations here, one of the reasons that the school aid fund was actually up a little bit or had some carry forward money heading into this budget year is we had a significant number of slots go unfilled. GSRP funding that was allocated last year that was not spent because slots were not filled at the local level. The indications are, and a lot of the local school districts and providers are saying that was somewhat of an anomaly because of the buildup effect and it taking a little longer to get some of these programs in place, and that they're seeing wait lists and much more interest into next year already. But that's certainly going to be a point of discussion, I would think, with the legislators as they look at the governor continuing to push forward with even more expansion into GSRP funding when we turned back essentially a significant amount of money last year. So what are some other, and the governor also continued her push on making community colleges free for residents of Michigan as well, which is a good thing. Adam, what are some other highlights you want to highlight before we jump into the questions here?
Yeah, so for sure. So I think in a couple areas, one, you highlighted a couple of the key K-12 components. I do want to highlight, because I know that there are some folks on the call from the special ed community. There are some funding increases in special ed as well. We do see that the continuation of that traditional funding stream that is pretty deeply inequitable, but serious. The other thing I want to highlight too is that you did highlight the foundation allowance increase. One of the things that the governor proposed, I think it's got a couple of year phase in on it, is this best practice, transparency and accountability elements to the foundation grant increase. I think this was the governor's attempt at answering, speaking to some of those NAEP outcomes that are happening, and utilizing parental engagement as an accountability tool. That's a very, very brief synopsis of a lot to unpack in that section, frankly. And I'm sure some of the school groups and those folks will have different, or larger opinions. On the GSRP front as well, I think we're going to see a pretty lively discussion around GSRP. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, we have seen the spots go unfilled. I think there's been a couple of budget cycles where we've not realized all of those spots, but we do have a change in leadership on the House side as well. And, Representative Tim Kelly, who was in the House, I served with him actually in the House. He's very familiar with really all of these line items. And so that's a real positive in my eyes, but he's got some strong opinions too. And that can work, that can sort of cut both ways. And so I think there's going to be larger discussions around GSRP in light of, especially increases in light of those slots being unfilled, and really just taking it back to the connection between GSRP and K-12. So those are just a few more things since you brought up the K-12 space as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And just to go a little further on the GSRP discussion as well, and I know we have a lot of childcare providers and childcare interested folks on the call. The governor's chose to continue pushing forward on the 4-year-olds, but also a significant expansion into what was a pilot for 3-year-olds as well. And we know that's an area of concern for childcare providers, and something, frankly, that has been, an issue for as long as I've been involved in this. I remember my son, who's now 19, when he was 3, in a previous job and in working with the ECIC and others, we were advocating for a pilot for 3-year-old pre-K, but with a set aside for infant toddler investments and increased investments in infant toddler care as a component of it. And so that this issue is not new, but what we've continued to struggle with is the recognition from both the governor and the legislature that investing in 3 and 4-year-olds is great and it's fine, but we also have to carry that investment down further, even into infants and toddlers, or the childcare model just does not work. And so it's a fight we're going to continue to fight, and we certainly understand it, and we know it's top of mind for a lot of childcare providers as well. Maddie, Lindsay, anything else? I see some questions in here I can jump into, but if I'm missing anything, let me know. First one I see is the mental health only available to preschool or all providers. That's the mental health consultation program that Maddie highlighted. No, it actually is available to all childcare providers and preschool providers as well. Unfortunately, as Maddie indicated, it's only available in 31 counties. That's up from where we started. Remind me, Maddie, I think we're at like 6 counties a few years ago. And so we've made some increase, some gains there, but the goal is ultimately to get this available statewide for those childcare providers and pre-K providers that have had access to it. They rave about it. It's a huge benefit for childcare providers at a relatively low cost, frankly, for what it's worth as well. And so we're going to continue to fight for increased funding. Like Maddie said, unfortunately, the governor's budget holds that line item static at status quo funding, which would not allow us to expand. But we're going to continue to fight for expansion to get that program available throughout the state. Next question I see, is there overlap or support to early Head Start with the governor's budget? This is a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think in some sense you can say anything that the governor's proposing relating to very young children or young children would be supportive of early Head Start. But I don't see anything directly as in terms of early Head Start components. I'll tell you that Head Start and early Head Start are obviously an area of concern at the federal level. And as we work with our national partners, especially those focused on early childhood issues, there's obviously a lot of concern around Medicaid, and that's a big focal point for everybody nationally. But even some of these more individual programs like Head Start and frankly, childcare funding and everything else could be subject to challenges at the federal level as that budget process plays out. Next question I see is there talk of extending free school breakfast lunch to GSRP programs with the push for free pre-K for all? That's a good question. I don't know if school-based GSRP programs are offering free breakfast and lunch with their GSRP now or not, or if there's an opportunity to do so. That's a good question. And Maddie, do you know anything about that, or Adam?
To my understanding, they're not included, but yeah, we can dig into that more.
Yeah,
Is
it'd
that
be interesting to see what the cost is, especially on the full day programs, right? It makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we're providing the meals for the 5 through whatever year olds at those same school buildings. So, there'd be some logistical challenges, I would think, for the group home providers and the community-based organizations, right? If we were to offer this for school-based GSRP, to try to get the food, the food components set up for the community-based organizations, but it's something worth considering for sure.
Just to highlight, actually, on that point, I think Jen in the comments made a differentiation between the school-based providers and the CBOs. We see this type of difference in equity in the out-of-school time space as well, not necessarily on free meals, but in general. And so I think it's just an important, I saw it in the comments, and it's an important comment to really highlight, frankly, because Michigan's system of delivery is quite diverse. And as a result of that, we do see some of these inequities. We're not treating everybody the same. It's really unfortunate. So another area of improvement.
I see Jen did respond in the chat that GSRP in the public schools are receiving free meals, which makes sense. But then the CBOs, so that might be an area for us to look at, is how we can extend that program into the CBOs. All right. Any other questions folks have, either about specifics in the budget? Like I said, our budget basics is now out. That has a lot of information on it around these issues and others. But we'd be happy to answer any other questions folks have about individual items or even process wise about the budget process as we move forward. Home visiting. Maddie, we did have some, we got a question about home visiting. What's on the home visiting front in the governor's budget proposal?
Yeah, so she did not propose any additional funding for home visiting. It was flat funding. I'm pulling up the notes. So 3.5 million in school aid funding for home visits for children who are at risk, determined at risk. And that's just flat funding. Also flat funding 2.75 million for rural home visiting. So that's another area of opportunity to push for increased rates for home visiting, considering that the Think Babies True Cost of Care report found we need to increase home-based or home visiting rates by 30% to account for the need for increased compensation and more supports for families.
Yeah, we're seeing similar workforce challenges in the home visiting front as we are on the child care side. Any other questions from anybody? Well, we'll be happy to give you back a few minutes of your lunch hour to get accomplished whatever you need to accomplish before I'm sure everybody's busy day starts right back up at 1 o'clock. But thanks everybody for tuning in. This program was recorded, as we noted at the beginning, and so the recording will be available on our website. It was also live streamed, I think, on Facebook, and I'm sure we had a number of folks on there as well. And if you think of any questions that you wish you would have asked, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us at Michigan's Children. And if we don't have the answers, we'll find them for you or direct you to people who do. And continue, like I said, the budget basics is up there, and continue to follow along with our podcast and with our regular Lunch and Learn series and any other advocacy tools that we bring to you. It's going to be a very interesting time here, both obviously with the state budget process playing out in the next several months, but also with everything that's happening at the federal level. Be certainly stay tuned and watch for opportunities. We'll be doing a lot of things on encouraging folks to engage with their congressional members here in the next couple of months. So I want to thank again Adam. Thanks Lindsay and Maddie and Steven and everybody from the team. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Adam. That was great.
Of course, thanks for